The man on the cobblestones was still breathing. Barely. Someone had driven a blade into him, precisely, professionally, and then walked away into the dark streets of Genoa without looking back. No robbery, no struggle, just a body left in the cold, and a silence where one of the most extraordinary musical minds of the 17th century used to be. Here's what makes this story different from every other murder in history. Alessandro Stradella had already survived 2 assassination attempts before this one. 2 separate hired killers, sent by 2 different powerful men, and he had walked away from both of them, once, allegedly, because his music was so beautiful that the assassin couldn't go through with it. He did not walk away this time. Stay with me because this story has everything. A genius who couldn't stop making enemies, a love affair that crossed the wrong family, a legend so wild it got turned into an opera, and a murder that was never officially solved, but everyone in Genoa knew exactly who ordered it. To understand why someone wanted Alessandro Stradella dead, you first have to understand what Alessandro Stradella was. Born in 1639, probably in Nepi, a small town north of Rome, Stradella grew up in an Italy that ran on 2 things, the church and scandal. He managed to become deeply embedded in both. By his 20s, he was in Rome, composing for the most powerful patrons on the continent. We're talking cardinals, princes, and the families that controlled the papal states. His music was different. It had drama to it, tension, a kind of emotional directness that other composers of his era weren't quite doing yet. Historians credit him with helping develop the concerto grosso form, the architectural blueprint that would later influence Corelli, Handel, and Vivaldi. He was, by every account, extraordinarily talented. He was also, and I cannot stress this enough, catastrophically bad at not getting himself into trouble. In Rome in the 1670s, Stradella was already developing a reputation that had nothing to do with music. He was running money-related schemes. There are records suggesting he defrauded a religious organization using collection funds meant for a charitable cause. He was seducing women connected to powerful men. He was making enemies faster than he was making friends. And then, in 1677, he made the specific mistake that would define the rest of his short life. Her name was Agnese van Uffel. She was beautiful, she was cultured, and she was the mistress of a Venetian nobleman named Alvise Contarini, a man with money, connections, and the temperament of someone who did not respond well to humiliation. Contarini had hired Stradella, because this is how the 1600s worked, to give Agnese music lessons. You can see where this is going. Stradella and Agnese fell into an affair, and when Contarini found out, which he did, because powerful men in Venice always found out, he didn't challenge Stradella to a duel. He didn't confront him publicly. He did something far more practical. He hired killers. Now here's where the story enters the territory of legend. The assassins tracked Stradella to Turin. They found him at a church, conducting a rehearsal for one of his oratorios, and according to the accounts that were circulated afterward, and later turned into a full opera by Friedrich von Flotho in 1844, the hired men sat down, listened to the music, and were so moved by its beauty that they could not bring themselves to kill him. They apparently went back to Contarini and said they couldn't do it. Contarini, incredibly, sent different assassins. Those men attacked Stradella in Turin. He was wounded, stabbed, but he survived. He fled the city. He ended up in Genoa. Now, a reasonable person at this point might consider a period of quiet, of keeping a low profile, of perhaps choosing a different line of work in a different country. Alessandro Stradella was not a reasonable person. Genoa suited him at first. It was a wealthy, independent republic, a city built on maritime trade, old money, and a rigid social hierarchy controlled by a handful of noble families who had been running things since the medieval period. The Grimaldi, the Doria, the Spinola. And the Lomellini. Stradella arrived with his reputation intact, at least musically. He secured patronage, he composed prolifically, and the Genoese aristocracy was happy to have him. His output during this period is remarkable: oratorios, cantatas, chamber music. He was working at a genuinely extraordinary pace. He was also, almost immediately, doing exactly what he had always done. The specifics of his Genoese romantic entanglements are murky. Historians have pieced together fragments, but the Lomellini connection is the one that keeps appearing. What seems clear is that Stradella became involved with a woman connected to one of Genoa's most powerful noble families. The kind of family that had maintained its status for generations through money, political alliances, and a very firm understanding of what happened to people who disrespected them. There is some evidence of a second attempt on his life during the Genoa years, a warning, perhaps, or a failed commission. He survived that one too. He kept composing, he kept performing. He may have genuinely believed that his talent made him untouchable. February 25, 1682. We don't know exactly where Stradella was going that night. We don't know if he heard footsteps behind him. We don't know if he turned around before the blade found him. What we know is that he was found stabbed, mortally wounded in the streets of Genoa. He was 42 years old. He died from his wounds. There was no investigation in any meaningful modern sense. No arrest. No trial. The identity of the person who physically carried out the murder has never been established with certainty. The name of whoever ordered it was never officially recorded. But Genoa was a small city, controlled by a small number of families, and the people who lived there at the time had a very clear sense of what had happened and why. The Lomellini family, or someone closely connected to them, had decided that they had been patient long enough. Here is the strange thing about Alessandro Stradella's afterlife. The murder didn't erase him. In some ways, it made him more compelling, a genius consumed by his own recklessness, a story so dramatic it practically asked to be turned into an opera, which, as I mentioned, it was. Von Flato's Alessandro Stradella premiered in Hamburg in 1844, romanticizing the whole thing: the music, the escapes, the doomed love affairs. But underneath the romanticization, there's something genuinely worth sitting with. Stradella was actually one of the most important composers of his era. The formal innovations in his work, the way he developed the relationship between soloists and ensemble, the emotional architecture of his vocal writing, left fingerprints on composers who came after him. He is not a household name today, and you could argue that the circumstances of his death, the scandal, the exile, the absence of a stable institutional patron, all of it scattered his manuscripts and made it easier for history to move past him. And the assassins who heard his music and couldn't kill him. That story is probably embellished, possibly invented entirely, but people kept telling it, for centuries. They kept telling it because it captured something true about the man, that his talent was real and remarkable, and it wasn't enough to save him. It just wasn't enough. Alessandro Stradella was murdered in Genoa in 1682. Nobody was ever charged. Nobody was ever punished. The woman he'd been involved with, whoever she was, disappears from the record entirely. The Lomellini family continued to be one of the most powerful families in Genoa for another century. And Stradella's music, the thing that may have saved his life once and absolutely could not save it the second time, still exists. There are recordings. There are performances. If you've never heard his work, it is worth an hour of your time. He was reckless and selfish, and he made enemies out of everyone who tried to protect him. He was also extraordinary, and someone had him killed in a street in Genoa when he was 42 years old and walked away clean. They were forgotten. Stradella was not.